Okay, everyone. So in this next lesson, let's talk about variables. And I took the liberty of creating another list here. If you're following along and you want to also see it on your browser, the things that we're discussing here, I've created a folder and a variables PHP here. And you have seen this in action in previous lessons that we've had, specifically in intro to strings. We do see this weird syntax from where we have the camel case. So if you're wondering what I'm talking about with regards to camel case, that's just simply a convention for naming some variables. In different programming languages, you might encounter camel case as a way for name variables. So let's have some more examples of different. Let me just create a PHP here, and then let's add some comments here. And we have some camel case. Camel case is going to be this way. We have Pascal case. We have kebab case. You might have seen some of the different URLs using kebab case. We also have what we call snake case. We can see this is a camel case that is inspired from the animal camel, from where the first word is small case, and the second first character is going to be capitalized, like a camel's back. So you might see some big companies using this kind of syntax. And by the way, these are programming case types. Some big companies would have their first character capitalized or small, and then the second character will be capitalized. So sometimes you might see some companies like iPhone, eBay, they are using this kind of syntax. That is very common right now in the programming community. We use it for variable naming. Okay, and we also have Pascal case, which is another way from where we have the first letter capitalized and the second letter will be also capitalized of the word that are combined. And this is usually used for class naming. If you have seen some class naming, so you would see that this is going to be a common practice in some programming languages. You might see this naming convention in some object-oriented programming. Right now, we're doing procedural programming, which is about you writing procedures or functions. Just have in mind functions. We'll be discussing that in a separate lessons so that we can perform operations on the data. And while object-oriented programming is more on creating objects that will contain data and functions. So just have that in mind. There's this concept called object-oriented. Right now, we're working with procedural PHP, and perhaps I'll create another course if you think that's something that you're interested to learn. I'll be going through the basics of object-oriented programming once we are done with these procedural programming examples for the fundamentals of PHP. And that's one of the use cases of Pascal case when we are naming our classes. Kebab case will be more on some programming languages. You will normally see this in URLs and CSS code that you might see out there on the World Wide Web. Okay, and we also have a snake case here. I think one good example for snake case will be for variable naming. Again, this is going to be for variable, if I can type that correctly, naming. And some other situations you might encounter will be seeing what we call the train case. Let me just pull that up, train case, which is almost similar with kebab case that separates the two words. But in this case, we have the first word capitalized, the first letter in the first word, and the second word will be capitalized. And if you have some PowerShell examples, you might see that this is used in a common naming convention for some of the aliases or some of the commands in PowerShell. You would see that this is a very common naming convention. Let's just try out here, get alias, and you would see that these are some of the aliases, and we can see the syntax for train case and a combination of Pascal case for the alias. If you have some Linux command background, you would see that this is a way for us to have some. We try to look at here, we do have get history, and they're using train case in this case. And we do have here echo command similar with what we're seeing in our examples in previous lessons that we've had. We do have clear host, CLS, which is clear host also. So we have aliases in the PowerShell, right? Another programming type that I just want to talk about here will be the macro case. Almost similar with kebab case, but in this, or with the snake case, but in this case we are using capitalized characters rather than small characters for the snake case. And usually you might see this with constant variables that don't get to be changed in our code. So let's say, for example, we have just as an example in JavaScript, we have const, let's say ball y, and const ball x, for example. You might see those kinds of some examples. You might want to use macro case here. And that's just one possible example from where you will be having some constant variables that doesn't allow you to have them redeclared within your code, or redeclared or change the value in your code. You know that this is going to be fixed values for the x and y values of a ball, size of a ball. So now let's go and talk a little bit more about variables. So when we talk about variables are way for us to store information. So in other programming languages, you might see some using var keyword, let keyword to declare a variable. In our case, if we are using PHP, we will be using a special character, which is the $sign. So that means we have the $sign here. $sign is always the beginning of a variable name in PHP. So let's say some examples for this is, let's say I have a assign the value of rod. So we are storing, so if we try to declare a variable, so let me just put here, declaring a variable. We have a variable declared here. Let's echo out. Let's say I would want to, this is us declaring variable a. Are we going to see some value here? If we try to declare a variable in PHP, take note, we declared it, we did not initialize it with a value. Those are two different things. So if I go back here in my lessons here, let's have variables. It's telling us undeclared, undefined variable a on line 28. And we're seeing here, this is declaring, this is us declaring a variable. And I think I made some mistake with my text there. This is us declaring our first variable named a, and we're encountering that line error from our browser. Let's just go back there. We do see that on line 28 it's telling us that we're encountering an error on line 28. Let me just resize this so that we can see it and easily. Okay, if we wanted to store, or if we wanted to initialize this value, initialize a variable with a value, we can just say a, assign the value of rod. And take note, we are using a string data type in this example. And if we try to refresh, we now have that named rod. This as declaring our first variable named rod, or that contains a string alt z, a string value of the name of, and again, as I mentioned, when we store a value to a variable, we can store a value of different data types. So it can be an integer, it can be whatever data type that is present in the programming language that we're working on. Right now, we're working on with PHP, so we can have that. See here what we're going to get just to demonstrate. So name of rod. This is us declaring and initializing. and initializing our first variable that contains a string value of the name of the value of what we currently have here as a string data type in our first variable. So some rules for PHP variables when we are naming some of our variables will be, we have to, rule number one, it has to start with the $sign. And then the name of the variable. Rule number two will be, it cannot start with the number. Okay. Rule number three is that it can only contain alphanumeric characters and underscores. That means that will be A to Z 0-9 and underscore. And rule number four is that they are case sensitive. So let's say I have here a name and $name are two different variables. And a variable name can also start with a letter or the underscore character. So I did mention $sign and then the name. So that means rule number 5, it can start with $sign, letter, or $sign, or underscore. Let's say $sign underscore name. Let's try to test this out. So I said that it has to start with the $sign. So $sign V is equals to 1. And if we try to echo that out, so this is a data type integer, right? Integer data type. And we can also try to echo this out. This is my integer variable. And let's just try to see if this will work. And some programmers use just letters, but it's much better if you will have descriptive variable names. But for now, that's also something possible. You can shorten the variable names that you're creating. And in this case, we are starting with the $sign, and then the name is representing the character B. And we cannot start with a number, right? So let's first try to see if this will work. Let's have an echo here for a line break. See, this is my integer variable 1. And we do see that this is my integer variable 1, and that's working. So have echo, cannot start with a number, right? So let's have $1, sign the value of, well, let's say 2, and the value of 2. Is that going to work? We're now encountering an error. So you'll see it cannot start with a number. So let's just comment that out. This will not work. Save that. So that means if we try $2 will not work as a variable. Okay. So that just means I just wanted to have some content here. So at least we can, $2 will not work as a variable. Let's add this here. It can only contain alphanumeric characters and underscores. That means A to Z. I think that's very clear. They are case sensitive. So let's try to echo out here. I'm just going to say, let's try to test out $name and the value of Rod. And $name is assigned the value of Lopez. Let's try to echo this out and see what are we going to get. My first name is $name, and my last name is $name. Are we going to get the same values? My first name is Rod and my last name is Lopez. So again, if I try to change this to name, you will see that it's getting that value of Rod. So it's case sensitive. Just have that in mind. So let's try out having this letter or name here. So let's type underscore character, and we are being descriptive here, and we can say underscore and echo out this is a test for showing $sign character will work. And let's end that statement. I go refresh our browser, and we do see that underscore is currently working. We can also, just to practice what we have so far learned, backslash here, save. We do have showing underscore will work. So we're just escaping the double quotes inside of the double quotes so that we won't run into any error. And just one last thing that I just want to talk about with regards to variables. Just take note, we can use booleans, floats, or doubles, objects, null, and resourced data types in the PHP language. We haven't yet covered some of those, but we'll try to look into them as we go along with some of the lessons. And the other thing that I just want to talk about here will be some constant variables. So that means if there's something that we want to be constant in PHP, and let's say I'm just going to say const pi, and I'm going to name it that way 3.14. We know that the value of pi never changes, right? So if we try to echo out pi here, what are we going to get? We do get, I think I made a mistake there. Let me just have this in here, and then const $pi is not going to work. We do get that 3.14, and we did not echo it out inside of curly brackets or double quotes because we're running into an error. If we put that there, you will see one thing you will notice is that we're getting the pi word getting displayed, the string. But if we wanted to have the value printed out correctly, we get that 3.14. So we can then concatenate, let's say this is a constant value that doesn't change. And we do see here that we just use that dot for us to concatenate. So let's say, for example, so instead of using the $sign as the identifier, so these are what we also call identifiers or names of variables. And here, this special character will be the keyword or the key character for declaring a variable. And in here, we are using the const keyword for us to be able to utilize this this pi word here, or the pi identifier, or the name of the variable, constant variable 3.14. And if I go back down here, and let's just say this is another example for constants. Let's say I want to have a ball underscore height, assign the value of 5, const ball width, assign the value of 5 again, echo that out. We don't need the double quotes. We can echo that out using the variables here. And let's see, will this be working? If we try to refresh the browser, we do see 55. Let's have some lines here. So we do get, this is ball height value is space. Let's concatenate that. So in other programming languages language like JavaScript, you use the plus sign, but in our case, we're using the dot. And this is the ball width value is, maybe it's plus sign. Let's just see. So we're encountering an error there. And let's have that dot syntax. And we do get the 5 and 5 here for the ball height and the ball width. And we're expecting throughout our code that this is not going to be changing. That's why we use the const keyword instead of the $sign. So I hope that this lesson got the ball rolling for you to understand what variables are. So thank you and see you in our next lessons.